So Amy's given me a really good introduction there. And what I'm going to cover today is just introducing you to the program that we call Course Enhancements. And I'm going to talk through a body of work that we did with 4 of the courses, and then just talk about how it's evolved from there. So Manaaki Tauira Course Enhancements program came about because we wanted to enhance some of the courses, and we knew that academics needed support to do this. And so in the Centre for Learning and Teaching, we have a teaching quality team, which I sit in as well. And myself and a colleague decided that we would come up with a model where we could provide facilitated support to examiners to help them through this journey. Manaaki Tauira at Lincoln University is a values-led approach, and this is just one of the programs of work that we're doing to improve learner success. Manaaki Taka is at its core, that's our core value, and we wanted to go through this journey and ensure that we were developing our people and trying to create a culture that is mana enhancing, but also leads to success for our tauira. So one of the things that we did in this program initially was think about, well, how will we know that we are successful through this? And I'm going to specifically focus today on intake 1, which was our pilot intake. We are just working through completing intake 3, so we have had additional intakes and made modifications as we go. But at the start, one of the things that we wanted to focus on was success. So we came up with some different measures of success. Now, some of these are easier than others to quantify and to measure and determine. But a key thing for us was around increasing pass rates in all of the different cohorts of students who were in the course. We also wanted to look at parity for our Māori, our Pacifica, and our disabled tauira. We wanted to see an increase in our course satisfaction scores that are measured from our formal course evaluations at the end of semester. And another big one for us was improving the feedback that we received from tauira, not just through the course satisfaction and course evaluation process, but also through feedback that we get throughout the semester. So we have a couple of mechanisms from that, and one of the main ones is through our Students Association. We have a student rep system, and we wanted to see improvements in the feedback that we received through there. And then, of course, it was really important for us that our examiners felt supported and that we got positive feedback from them through this process as well. So first thing was to identify the priority courses that we would take through this model. And we did that through looking at a few things. So we looked at a number of course statistics. So things like the pass rate, the average mark, the median. We looked across the number of students enrolled in the course, the level of the course, those sorts of things. We also then fed in that tauira feedback from course evaluations and student rep feedback. We looked at, I wrote here disparity, because it wasn't so much that we wanted to identify which courses had parity, we wanted to identify which courses didn't yet have parity. And then we wanted to think about which courses did we feel would have the greatest chance of success through this program. So looking at which courses are in some of the core programs, which are 100 level courses, those sorts of things. As a result of looking across all of these different factors, we identified a number of courses that we proposed to the Manaaki Tauira Steering Committee, and they approved those courses to be included in the pilot or intake 1. And we ended up with 9 courses. So 4 of those courses sit in a program called the Diploma in Agriculture. This is a sub-degree program. And then we had 2 courses at each of the 100, 200 and 300 levels. And those courses were not related in any way. So they weren't prereqs to each other. They weren't necessarily in the same program. They were just individual courses. So we had a combination of individual courses in this program and the qualification approach. We wanted to see how that went and what differences could come from that. As we worked through our course enhancements program, there are a number of steps in the process that we worked with, primarily between the facilitator and the examiner, but also bringing in feedback from our tauira where we could as well, trying to bring as much of that learner voice through. So we started with a launch, and we had senior leadership attend that launch and just talk about the importance of Manaaki Tauira and the body of work and the importance of course enhancements. We invited the examiners, their line managers, their HODs, and their associate deans and the faculty deans. So we launched the program and talked about the involvement and how we would be supporting them. As you can imagine, there was a little bit of skepticism in the room, but we followed that launch up with a process of reflection and sort of like an initial consultation. So in the reflection process, we asked the examiners to think about their course and what aspects did they enjoy about the course, what were its strengths and what were its perhaps areas where they have wanted to make changes, but perhaps didn't have the time or the understanding of how to do that change. We also asked them to reflect on the type of learners they typically get in their course, and then we asked them to reflect on themselves as an educator. We also, as facilitators, did a process of reviewing the course where we looked at as much data as we could find. We went through their course outline, we looked at their course page on the learning management system, we went through as much student feedback as we could identify, and we looked through the course data as well, and just started to get a really good feel for the course. We then also contacted past students in the course who are still around on campus and asked them to attend a focus group and provide us with some feedback that may not have already been captured in other course evaluations or other student feedback. After we'd met with the examiners to look at their initial reflection and to share some of the findings of our course review, we started to come up with a bit of a plan of what they wanted to do and how we could support them to do that. We used a 4-week asynchronous online course to help the examiners focus on certain areas of their delivery and their course and help them to refine that action plan. We followed that with an in-person workshop. Initially, we had thought that we would run a 2-day workshop in the mid-semester break, and all of the 9 examiners would be able to attend on the same day and work in a really collaborative model. Of course, that didn't work. I can hear probably some of you chuckling at that, trying to get 9 examiners in the room for 2 days. We settled on a 1-day workshop where we had 7 of the examiners attend. The other 2 were involved in field tours during mid-semester break, and we weren't able to identify a day where they would be able to work in. In the in-person workshop, we really used a collaborative model, and we got the examiners to start sharing some of the things that they had identified about their course and their learners and some of the aspects of their action plan. And in particular, the diploma and agriculture examiners, we got them working together, and I'll talk a bit more about that soon. So following the workshop, we then met with the examiners on a regular basis and really helped them to identify the action plan and really tease that out a bit more. So sometimes the items on the action plan were pretty high level, and we really wanted them to drill down and break that down into something more tangible and something that was actionable. One of the key things for us with that action plan was stressing to the examiners that this is a facilitated model. So there was initial hesitancy to identify too many changes because the examiners didn't feel they had the capacity, and in some cases the capability to make those changes. So a key thing for us was stressing that we're in it together, and the idea is that we will help you as the facilitator to enact those items on your action list. So we did a lot of the grunt work, if you like, or the manual labour to help the examiners put this into action. The action plan was definitely a co-creation model and a co-implementation model. Course delivery was the next step, and it was really important to us that we didn't say, right, we've done all this work for you before you deliver and now you're on your own. It was really important that we supported the examiner all the way through this journey, and the first time they deliver the enhanced course was a key aspect for us. So we had regular checkups with our examiners, and we undertook a teaching observation. So primarily before this, the focus is on the course. For those of you involved in learning and teaching, you know that the examiner is a key part of that course, but our key focus through here was the course, but we did want to give something back to the examiner, and so we undertook a teaching observation and provided them with constructive feedback, which they were very grateful for. And then to follow that up, we wanted to work through a post-delivery review process and reflect with the examiner on what's worked, what do they think they need to modify next time. So highlighting that this is not a one-stop shop. We're not going to just fix everything in one go. It's an ongoing journey, and we need to look at continually improving the course and how can we help them to do that. And so that was what we did with the post-delivery review. When we worked through this process, there were 4 focus areas that we were looking at across the course. Course design, so that was really focused around our learning outcomes and ensuring constructive alignment. Our assessment, so thinking about the type of assessment, does it work for your learners, does it work for your course? How good are your instructions? Is there some more clarity we can provide? And what is your marking criteria and how well do you provide that to students? Student engagement, very much looking at ARCO and Manaaki through here and thinking about how we can support our learner. And then we talked about course delivery, and we wanted the examiners to start thinking about moving from very much an in-person delivery to more of a blended delivery, and thinking about how they could do that and how they could improve the accessibility. So working in with some of the work we're doing in the Disability Action Plan as well. In hindsight, 4 areas like this was probably too much for some examiners, and in the future we might focus in primarily on some. Certainly in some courses we had a heavier focus in one area than the other, just depending on the course. So I want to talk now specifically about the journey that we went through with the Diploma in Agriculture examiners. So the process and the focus areas that I've talked about so far, we applied that to all of the 9 examiners in this program. But when we looked at the Diploma in Agriculture, we also thought about that from a qualification approach as well. So in the Diploma in Agriculture, there are 4 core courses that they do in one semester, and then another 4 core courses in the second semester. So the students have no choice. They're all in the same courses, and that made this a lot easier. So the key focus for us with the Diploma in Agriculture was really about thinking about the learner journey through the whole qualification. So not 4 pieces that don't make a whole, but what is the whole and how do we get the learner from the start to the end of that semester in a really supportive way that helps them to achieve success across all 4 courses. That journey started with getting the examiners to collaborate. A number of the examiners that came into course enhancements for these courses were new to the courses. Some of them had only just taken over the course. Some had maybe been involved the year before, but not necessarily as the examiner. So we got them in a room pretty much and got them talking to each other. Some of them had never met in person before, but we got them sharing about themselves, but also their course and how they found the learners to be in that course and how the learners responded to some of the learning activities and the content in their course. And then we also set up a team site so they could easily share information about their courses. And what was really exciting from that is the number of changes that they came up with. And a lot of this is driven from the examiners, and I was there as the facilitator and helping them put the pieces together and helping them to navigate the other university processes and systems that would allow them to do this. So on the slide there, I've written some of the key things that we worked to change. So the first one we did was really about reviewing the assessment that was in the course. So the examiners were looking at, well, what type of assessment course, what type of assessment is most appropriate to the type of learners we have. And a lot of them identified that they have a lot of learners that have learning difficulties, but maybe don't necessarily identify as having learning difficulties, don't necessarily enroll with our inclusive education service that supports learners with difficulties. And they wanted to make sure that the assessment they were providing was right for the students in the course. The students that come into the Diploma in Agriculture are also often very practical, and school hasn't necessarily been the best place for them, but they are still very bright and have a lot to offer. So how do we encourage them to share that knowledge and to understand that they can be successful at university? So we looked at the assessment, and we also looked at the scheduling. So thinking about making sure we didn't have 2 big assessments in the one week, thinking about what assessment do we have in the first half of the semester? What do we have in the first few weeks that we can then track progress and look at student engagement? We then approached the timetable, and the examiners had always looked at their own timetable, but not necessarily the timetable of the other 3 examiners at the same time. So I went into the timetable software and I printed out the timetable with all 4 courses, and let's just say they all got a bit of a shock and they're like, we need to do something about this. So we looked at scheduling. We looked at things as simple as, when do the students get a lunch break? When can they actually digest the information? How many hours do they have in a row? How many days of the week are they in class? When do they have time for anything outside of that? We looked at the field trips. So there are a certain number of field trips that the students go on out into industry, and we created a bit more structure to those. And we put those in every second week and had a fortnightly schedule. And in the alternate week, one of the courses wanted to do a lab, but only every 2 weeks. So we used that same day of the week. And then we thought about lab streams. So in the timetable, the way it had worked is the students couldn't go to all of their labs for the different courses because of the way the labs were structured. So we did quite a bit of work on the timetable. And part of that facilitated model was around us identifying how we can help them. So I did all the work of liaising with the timetable office, and the examiners told me what they needed to have changed. Field trips was another big change in the diploma in agriculture. So field trips have always existed in one of the courses and very much focused on the content in that course. And the examiner said, wouldn't it be great if we all went on the field trips together and we can help the students to connect our different courses together and the content, because they're not in isolation. So they started introducing these field trips as very much more multidisciplinary, and all the examiners went on the first field trip and they went on other field trips as their schedules allowed with the other courses that they teach. And on every field trip, they started to talk about the different elements. So they were farm management trips, they became farm management, soils, plants, and technology field trips. Another really cool thing that we introduced that the examiners have kept going and are really keen to keep going is something that we nicknamed the Monday sessions. There were a number of aspects of knowledge and skills and abilities that they wanted students to have that didn't necessarily fit into any one course. So they thought, well, how can we present this information in a way that the students will absorb it? And so we came up with this idea of allocating one of the hours in the timetable to all of the courses, and it happened to be Monday at 9 a.m. And so it's nicknamed the Monday session, or sometimes referred to as the diploma session, because it also encapsulates the diploma in horticulture, which has 2 courses in common. At that Monday session, they covered a whole heap of topics. So they started with inviting Inclusive Education, our disability service, to come and talk to the students and just share what that service can do for them. And that resulted in an increase in registrations with that service. Our proctor came and talked just around disciplinary matters, and that helped to reduce the number of disciplinary matters amongst diploma students. We had our learning advisors come and talk to the students around things like study skills, test and exam preparation. We had them talk about note taking. So before the first field trip, we talked about note taking. We had someone come and talk about field trip conduct, what to expect on a field trip. So these were things that hadn't necessarily been covered before, or they'd been squeezed into a particular course where they didn't really naturally fit and had led to negative feedback about that particular course. And then they started to branch away from those sorts of skills and start inviting guest speakers, people from industry that they really felt the Tauira would benefit from, but they didn't necessarily fit nicely in any one course. So through all of this, the learner was at the heart of what they were talking about, is how do we improve the learning experience for the students who are in the diploma in agriculture, and how do we do that together, collaboratively, and how do we share from each other? And what's happened is we've now got topics that are delivered in one course and then fed into others. So the examiners talk about each other's course in the classroom, which is really fantastic. As a result of this process that we went through for the diploma in agriculture, but also for the other 5 courses, we did make some modifications, and I just want to talk a little bit about those modifications now. So one of the things that we identified through this is examiners would just really like to be involved in the timing of when they're involved in the course, and they want to have a chance to put their voice forward as to whether there's another course that works well with their course and possibly should go through at the same time. So we changed our priority course selection approach, and we continually increase the data-driven approach that we use, but we also seek more input from the faculty deans, the associate dean academics, and the HODs, and ask them to liaise with their examiners. So we now give them a list of suggested courses, and then we tell them how many courses we can facilitate, and within the faculty they can negotiate, and then between faculties they can negotiate for spots, and then the faculty deans come back to us with their list. We have to do a little bit of negotiating just around the total number, but it's worked pretty well. And the other thing through that process then is that examiners get much earlier notification of their involvement in this program, and they can work that into workload planning, and the HOD can work with them in terms of do they have the capacity to do this and what support would need to be in place to help them through it. One of the other key changes that we did is we really saw huge benefits from the collaborative model that the Diploma in Agriculture examiners went through. And so we wanted to make sure other examiners had more of that. So rather than our one-day workshop, which we wanted to be a two-day workshop, but really doing it all at once wasn't ideal. We wanted to spread that through the 4-week course. So we changed the 4-week asynchronous online course and the in-person one-day workshop. We changed those into a blended 4-week course. So now we have the examiners work through some material online, and we meet with them once a week, and we focus on each of those topics that I talked about: course delivery, assessment, student engagement, and our course design. We focus on each of those each week. And then we added something called a self-enrollment option. So even if you're not in the full course enhancements program, you can still benefit from some of the journey by being involved in the 4-week course and coming up with an action plan and having some input from us as facilitators to help you do that. So that's kind of where we're at. As I said, we are just completing intake 3, so we'll be working through changes with intake 3, and then next year we'll have intake 4 and 5, and we're continually evolving the content and how we work with those examiners. But a key part for us is about keeping that learner-centric model, but around supporting the examiners. What we found is that a number of the examiners want to change. They have ideas of what to do. They just don't necessarily know the process or have the capacity to be able to do what they want to do. So thank you.